Yeah, welcome to another episode of the Ceaze Tha Day Podcast. I'm your host, Khing Ceaze. Alright, seeing as how this is the pilot episode, I'm saying this is going to be a little bit of background about myself in order to get everybody more accustomed with what the podcast is really about. As I said in the trailer, this is about my life experiences, the things that I've experienced and how I got through them, as well as the lessons that I've learned in order to continue to push through life. So I guess we'll get started with my childhood. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Grew up on 20th and Wright, close to Center Street, and anybody that know that, you know what I mean, you know that's the hood. So I grew up in a pretty rough environment, I would say. I saw a lot of things at an early age. But, you know what I mean, my parents grew up in a single family home, my mom raising two kids, me and my younger sister. My dad was around for the first, I want to say about 10 years, and then he moved from Milwaukee to Georgia in order to take care of my grandma. So, you know what I mean, like that kind of played a big part, I'll say that much, but we'll get more into that once we get into my teenage years. But the kind of kid I was more so, I was a good kid. I mean, I would never have said that I was a bad kid, but I mean, I read a lot. I was a Harry Potter fan, Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, things like that. Collected the cards, collected Hot Wheel cars as well, the model cars. I still to this day love cars. But I mean, when you're that type of kid and you grow up in a rough environment, it changes you a bit. And the environment I grew up in, like I said, it was the hood. So, you know what I'm saying? I saw guns early. I saw drugs early. You know what I mean? Like, I had conversations about, you know what I'm saying, like, the hood. Like, it was really that. And so, like, for my elementary years, I really was one of those kids where I felt like my neighborhood was everything. I feel like I would have never left the neighborhood. I felt like I was loyal to my hood. My childhood hobbies, like I said, I read a lot. Video games, basketball was my first love. Grew up playing basketball. I mean, like, growing up in a single family home as the oldest, you know, especially as a male, especially in my generation, I feel like a lot of people will relate to it. You get a lot of early responsibilities. You know what I mean? Like, it could be small things like washing dishes, cutting grass, things like that, just to help out in the household. And I was one of those kids where I was identified as the man of the house because I was the only male in the house. But looking back, like, I feel like that kind of put pressure on me because that meant you had to protect the women in the house. So when I should have been being a kid, I was kind of in the mindset of you gotta be this man of the house. I mean, that kind of faltered over into school because, like, in elementary school, I was straight A student, honor roll every quarter. I went to 21st Street School. I started off at Phyllis Wheatley, and then in third grade transferred to 21st Street School. That transfer kind of opened my eyes up to a lot more because it wasn't just neighborhood kids in the school. So I got to meet a lot of, like, one of my best friends in elementary school was an Asian kid, and him, like, we got real tight through, like, the Pokemon card thing. We would trade Pokemon cards and talk about the show and talk about the movie and everything like that. And it kind of opened my eyes up to a lot of other things. But once you get into my teen years, that was when things, like, started to shift a little bit. I got to middle school. I went to Samuel Morse Middle School. It's middle school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That is for the gifted and talented. I went in for creative writing. Again, that opened my eyes and my life up to new people from other neighborhoods, new people from, you know what I'm saying, other sides of the city that I had not embarked on. Peer pressure came into that, you know what I mean? Like, you get around a bunch of other kids who are doing things that you're not, you know what I'm saying, normally accustomed to seeing kids doing. You know what I mean? And it kind of it pulls you in a little bit. And I was definitely pulled in. And I developed a need to keep up, I would say. That need to keep up was kind of like, I didn't want to be looked at as one of the unpopular kids, or I didn't want to be looked at as a lame, and I was caring more about what other people thought as far as my clothes, everything like that. So that need to keep up kind of created a spark in me that led to a lot of unhealthy habits and things. I started smoking weed around like 14. 14 was about the time I had my first blunt. And, you know what I'm saying, that came from being influenced on my environment. Like, when you see other people doing it, it's like, you don't want to be looked at as the lame kid. I ain't want to be looked at as the weirdo, the scaredy cat, the square. So, you know what I'm saying, I just picked up the habit. At 15, I left my mom's. We had a disagreement. I guess I was living a little before my time, before my means, and I mean, we had a disagreement. But I'm one of those people, like, when I leave a situation, it kind of like, it puts me in a mindset of never going back. You never want to go back. And for me at 15, it was like, okay, leaving mom's career, she ain't agreeing with how we living, never go back. And that kind of put me in the survival mode. Like, at that age, I felt like returning back to my mom's house was the biggest loss I could take, because it kind of, in my eyes, rather than, most people would have looked at it like, okay, I'm gonna just go to my mom's house because it's a safe space. But for me, it was like a pride thing. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm not going back to that situation because the situation wasn't working for me to be me. And survival mode was my only mentality from about 15 going on 16 until I turned 18. And that put me in a state of mind of like, get what you need by any means necessary. So I got involved with a lot of things early, like selling weed and shit like that. So that developed trust issues, that developed trauma, that developed different levels of individuality where it was hard for me to fit into a family dynamic. And still to this day, like, I can be honest, like, I'm just now getting over that dynamic of fitting into a family dynamic and knowing what role I play. Like, I always felt like people come into family situations and they have responsibilities. And that was just how I was raised. You have responsibilities as a man. And so, like, growing up, I always felt like it was my responsibility to secure the house. It was my responsibility to protect the house. And that kind of swayed me from actually taking time in self-discovery. So while the rest of my friends were out doing things that they like to do and, you know what I'm saying, things they were interested in, I was like just stuck in survival mode. And that kind of led over to my adult years. I mean, like, I met my daughter's mother at 18. You know what I mean? We, as the old folks would call it, we started shacking. You know what I mean? No ring, no marriage, no nothing. Just, we was in the same household, so it was like we carried that load. And neither one of us, you can look back now, I'm looking at it, I'm 32 now. At 19, I had no idea what it really took to run a household. Yeah, your ego plays into it, and you feel like, yeah, I'm the man, I make money. But is it the right way? Am I really putting my family in the best position possible? And back then I wasn't. I was still out there in the streets doing things that I had no business doing. I mean, by the time I was 19, 20, I was okay with working a job, I guess, but they never really stuck. Because I would always feel like I needed fast money. I always felt like I wasn't making enough money. So I dibbled and dabbled still in the streets while working my jobs. I worked little jobs like Walmart, temp jobs, factory jobs, shit like that. But I always had my one foot in the job, the other foot in the street. So I would like clock out and literally be on the block, just hustling, trying to get as much money as I could in order to maintain a lifestyle that I was choosing to live, which was partying, kicking it, drinking, smoking, kicking on the block with the guys and shit like that. So what really like slowed me down was having my daughter. I had my daughter at 19, and I'll never forget that day, like watching the delivery, watching her birth. I called my mom, and the only thing I could really say was like, Mom, she's here. And I just broke down into tears, like, this is a life that I've created. And in creating that life, I kind of felt a new spark, I would say, because like now I have that responsibility. It wasn't an option. Like back then, you grow up as a man of the house, you know, you got options. Mama, she gonna do what she do. Little sis, you make sure she good, and you get back to doing you. But when you have a child, it's a little different. Having a child changes a lot of things because it puts you in a position of not just living for yourself anymore. And I battled that for a while. But I found peace and solitude in music. I started recording music at like 19 or 20. A couple of guys that I was hanging around, we created a group. It was called Homie. Homie was short for hoes out money, and funny as it is, but that's the way we was living. It was money over everything for us. And you I mean, like I didn't start taking music serious until I started around 2010, 2011. I didn't start taking it serious until about 2013, after me and my daughter's mom had split, and I was back in survival mode. Like, I've been living my life in survival mode for so long because I've never really felt like I had a place to call home, if that makes sense. Quite sure somebody will relate to that, but for about 3 or 4 years, I was just trying to figure life out, like between Milwaukee and Atlanta. Like I would bounce back and forth, and just like, of course, still doing the dumb shit, but it was a search for purpose. It was a search for self-identity. But in the midst of that, like I feel like I just kind of like gave up on searching for self-worth and just the materialistic aspect of everything. Like I wanted the cars, I wanted the shoes, I wanted to be the one in the club that was, you know what I'm saying, in the club. Like I used to be in the club. Anybody that know Club Onyx days between 2012 and 2014, everybody knows, like Club Onyx was where I was at. And I spent those years really like just wasting my time. Like looking back now, again at 32, I could say I was wasting my time in pursuit of popularity and being liked by other people because I didn't love myself enough. Once I started to understand, I didn't start understanding that self-worth until 2015, when my life was, in a way, it was metaphorically taken away because I was incarcerated. I was incarcerated for 3 years, and that process was, every level was different. I mean, I spent 6 months in the house of correction. The case was basically set up for me to fail. I didn't talk to a lawyer. I wasn't in the courtroom to hear what was going on. And honestly, I kind of just bowed out. Was like, you know what? Like, these people don't give me whatever time they give me because of the picture that's being painted. And after 6 months in the house of correction, like at that time, like I said, it was purgatory. I was in between death and life. Because while I'm in here, yeah, I'm still alive, but what am I really doing to benefit my own life? That's when the thinking process started. And I began to self-reflect on a lot. Like, how can I get through this? How can I really like better myself to make sure I'm not in this situation again? Like, prison was boring as fuck to me. Like, I ain't gonna lie, it was boring. I don't like hanging around too many niggas if I don't know them. So going to prison around a bunch of strangers, yeah, you know a couple people, but it's not easy. You know what I mean? I developed even more trust issues in prison. I developed even more, like, I withdrew from life. Like, I didn't care to try anymore at first. But when I went to sentencing, the judge told me, he said, I'm gonna give you 6 years, 3 in and 3 out, which means I would do 3 years in the penitentiary and I would have 3 years on parole. So, I mean, like, that's when I started. I was in a sober mindset, obviously. But I started to think about life a little different. Like, okay, now I have this time frame. What am I going to do in this time frame in order to better myself, so that way when I leave this situation, I can create better environments and better scenarios for myself. And the first thing was, like, I didn't learn emotional intelligence, like, in depth. Like, growing up, you taught, as a man, you're not supposed to cry. Stop being a bitch. Stop whining so much. And we don't really talk about how that affects the mentality of young men. And it causes us to suppress a lot of things that we feel. And we may not feel safe to you know what I mean, talk about these things. And it's, like I said, it's nothing against my parents. It's nothing against my parents at all, because me going to prison was strictly based around my decision making. But at the same time, there's a certain standard that needs to be held as parents. You need to be a safe space for your children to be able to communicate who they are. And your job is to help them be who they are, not to instill in them who you want them to be or who you need them to be, but rather actually getting to know your kids. And like, I feel like because our generation of parents work so much, they never really had the time to hear us. So it was just expectations. And as parents, we say, okay, yeah, you can talk to me, but we got raised in a generation of discipline. I know damn well everybody born between the 80s and 90s, you got your ass whooped. Like, anything you did wrong came with punishment. And again, like, I look at it now, looking back, it was the same system that was instilled in our ancestors. Like, if you do something wrong, you'll be punished. You got whipped as a slave and you got whoopings as a kid. You know what I'm saying? Like, it became the norm in our culture. Like, punish your kids with a belt, like, or sometimes in certain situations, whatever you could get your hands on. Like, and I feel like so many kids go through this and have went through this. We never really acknowledge like how that plays a part on that kid's psychological growth. If your child is afraid to speak up for any reason, it'll cause them to, you know, kind of like shy away from even being open. So they start to develop these masks. They develop whatever mask gets them through the day. And, you know, learning emotional intelligence, I learned at the root of my addictions in marijuana, you know what I mean, drinking lean, and alcohol. Those were addictions. I was using these substances in order to numb myself from feeling the emotions because I did not know how to convey these emotions. So relationships have always been hard for me. Family situations have always been hard for me because I still have the mentality that I'm supposed to be doing something. It's not as easy to transition from being taught like you're a man, you're supposed to do things, you're supposed to get things done, to growing up and understanding like it's okay to sometimes take a day for yourself. And again, it kind of ties into the whole concept of me going into the podcast, because I mean the name of the podcast is Ceaze Tha Day. Every single day you have to take the opportunity to build yourself, and when you build yourself, you'll attract the things that will make you greater. Not better, but greater. So, learning the root of my addictions was placed in my emotions, I became more aware of how to convey things, how to communicate. And the first thing I did was understand that I needed a new environment. So, upon release in 2018, I transferred my parole from Wisconsin down to Savannah, Georgia, where my father lived. And moving to that environment, I mean, it was different. My dad lives in a smaller town, but Savannah is a small town in itself. But it kind of gave me that second chance that I needed. It gave me a second opportunity to better myself. So I continued to do my music. Of course, I had to work a job because I'm on parole, but it was a bit easier because it was a slower pace, so I didn't have that urge to keep up. And, you know, coming to a small town from a big city, like you become, people are curious about you. And eventually, like, I began to self-identify with understanding, like, okay, you have an opportunity to recreate yourself. You have an opportunity to recreate your life structure, the way you think, the way you move, the way you budget, all of those things. This is a second chance to better develop your own life. Because me knowing me, like, the things that I was doing at that time, before I went to prison, 9 times out of 10, if I had not went to prison, I would have either been, honestly, I probably would have been dead. And that kind of brings me back to like the entire prison system. And it all depends on your mentality. When you go in there, are you here to be here because they put you here, or are you actually paying attention to why you're here? Because most of us are there because we don't understand how to construct a successful life, because it's not a part of our immediate environment. It's not a part of our day-to-day life to see successful people when you come from the hood. So moving to Georgia, like, it was a lot slower, so I had time to process different. I didn't have to keep up with the people on the block. It wasn't a money race. It wasn't a popularity contest. I actually got to meet genuine people. So meeting genuine people kind of helped me become a genuine person. And the first step to becoming genuine is to be honest with yourself about who you want to be. Continuing my music career, I just started to record it. Like I said, I got back to what made me me. I went back to my childhood, that inner kid in me. I had suppressed it for so long with feeling like oh, people aren't going to like you because you read. Oh, people aren't going to like you because you're smart. People aren't going to like you because you're different than what they are. And a lot of black males, and I'm not just going to say black males, a lot of males in general who grow up in not so positive environments, we fall victim to trying to impress our colleagues and our peers. And whatever the peers are doing, 9 times out of 10, we're going to make an attempt to do it. So when I left prison, my number one agenda was be yourself. Be free to create. Be free to express how you feel and don't feel bad about that. And I began to reflect and understand like the life that I was living, like understanding what led me to those things. So I began to review my traumas. I started to heal from those traumas, and understanding now, like I suffer from borderline personality disorder, which is pretty much the simplest way to put it, black and white thinking. Like my brain doesn't have a gray area. So there are days where I may be extremely happy. There are days where I may be extremely depressed or extremely angry. Like my emotions are affected by my BPD through heightened senses of emotions. And that's a struggle for me now because I'm learning how to cope with this. And it just, you really have to withdraw into yourself and meditate and pray, whatever it is that you do to find solace within, to make you feel like you again. And like I always say, like you have to feed that inner kid. There's not a single piece of you as a human being that you can suppress and say that you're 100% genuine. So as I learned that, I began to focus on that. I began to get more in tune with the things that I didn't have growing up and how they affect me now. The affection, as an adult, I crave affection. And a lot of my relationships have not worked because of that need for affection. Like I can be very needy when it comes to having a partner. Like I expect my partner, because I didn't have that level of affection, I yearn for that level of affection. And so I kind of put that standard on whoever my partner is at that time to deliver that level of affection. And if they can't, then I started to question myself. Am I worthy of this? Am I good enough for this? Is this something that is meant for me? Am I just, you know what I mean? Like you begin to reflect, and self-reflection is very important. But all in all, like to close out the episode, I would just like to say, like, take time for yourself and really sit down, start journaling. I use my music as my journal sometimes, and I convey the things that I need to get off of my chest in order to feel like me. And for the longest, I used to hear people tell me, you make music for yourself, and I do. But the goal is always to make music in hopes that somebody can relate to what I'm discussing in that particular song. And that really is the key to a core fan base. I used to try and make popular music and follow trends and things, but I realized I do my best work when I'm in a self-reflective mode and discussing the things that I've been through. So again, like I said, I suggest everyone listening to this podcast episode right now, begin to journal. Begin to write down your thoughts and really understand what's making you think in this manner. Like self-reflection is very important. Self-reflection is one of the most important aspects of understanding your life and your life purpose, because hidden in the trauma are the reflections of the many decisions that you make. A lot of our decision making is based in our childhood upbringing. So there are people in this world who don't even know, like, okay, why do I do this? Why do I do this? You do it because of the things that you've been taught. So you have to reprogram yourself and truly begin to work on self-development. And nobody else can do that for you. You know, like I'm a very spiritual person, so I meditate, I light my incense, I calm myself. I'm learning to conquer my own demons, as they would say. And you have to have a purpose. Even if that purpose is just being the better version of you, you really have to be honest with yourself and admit your flaws, admit where your shortcomings are, admit what you need, and never feel bad about saying what you need. A lot of people are people pleasers, and I'm guilty of it all in the same. I've been a people pleaser, where you sacrifice parts of yourself in order to please and maintain relationships. But in the same sense, you have to, one of my favorite words is reciprocity. So with reciprocity comes reflections. When you find someone who reflects the same energy you give, then you know that you're in a safe place. And anytime you don't feel safe, you need to acknowledge that, because that's a need. This is something that your spirit, your soul is telling you, like, hey, I need this. And a lot of the times we suppress those things we don't want to lose people. We don't want to look like the bad guy. We don't want to be the villain. Like, one of my favorite things to say is, bro, you either become a hero or you live longer. They say you die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain. I'm big on villains. Like, I always said that villains were misunderstood. I was a comic book kid growing up, so Batman was one of my favorites, and I always loved to look into the origin stories of the villains, because it's kind of like Bruce Wayne came from a wealthy family. He never really struggled. He never really had any issues, and it was a traumatic instance where his parents were killed in front of him that caused him to withdraw. And withdrawing, he kind of vowed to protect the city of Gotham, to ensure that nobody else had to feel that pain. But in the course of that, you look at the villain story, and most of them are just people who grew up with less and had to survive. And when I started looking at it, like, in the beginning, I felt bad. Like, am I a villain? Like, am I really the bad guy? Am I the bad person? Like, there's no such thing as good or bad. There's balance. We all have good and bad within us. We all make good decisions. We all make bad decisions. We all have good characteristics and we all have bad characteristics. But in the same sense, it's one of those situations where you have to be okay with the decisions you make. Some decisions are going to be looked at as bad decisions, but what's good for you may not be good for others, and what's bad for you may not be bad for other people. And I'm always trying to get the people around me to understand that individuality is a freedom. I can't have people around me and try and tell them how they should live their life just because it works for me. Now, if someone comes to me and asks for that guidance or asks for that help, absolutely, I have no problem with assisting, but it's not your job to instill what people should or should not be doing. It's for you as an individual to pick and choose the type of environments and the type of people that you choose to include in your life, the people that you choose to have in your energy. Like, you have to protect your energy and listen to that inner voice. When things don't seem right, listen to that voice. I always say I love women, and they have a gift that they're naturally born with called intuition. And for men, most of the time, we don't develop that intuition until we actually understand who we are. We're all gifted beings. We're all special beings. There's not a single human being on this earth that does not have the capability of being great. It's all about understanding who you are and what you do. Me, I'll never stop recording music for the simple fact it helps me. And at the same time, I've helped other people through my music, because a lot of people tell me I understand that situation. I felt this song. I love that song because it helped me through this situation. It helped me through that situation. But all in all, like, you have to practice self-appreciation. We as a people, and I mean a human race, we need to stop beating up on ourselves because of past decisions and past experiences, especially things like childhood. There's nothing you can do to change your childhood except look at it and take the lessons learned and apply them as an adult to make sure that you don't continue to make the same fucking habits. You have to be okay with facing those emotions. You have to be okay with looking in the mirror. You have to be okay with understanding that you're not always going to feel the best. You're not always going to feel your best. So to close out this episode, again, in conclusion, spend time with yourself. Spend time in isolation. Spend time listening to that voice in your head and trust that voice. So many times we try and correct that voice when the truth is you need to listen to that voice. Acknowledge that voice is your innermost core. That is the voice that knows what is best for you. We all are connected to God. So I tell everybody, if you listen to yourself, you're listening to God. So pay attention to that inner voice. Pay attention to your emotions and make the most out of that. So my challenge for you today is spend about 20 minutes with yourself and journal exactly what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and just be honest with yourself. This has been another episode of the Ceaze Tha Day Podcast. Hope to see you on the next episode. Remember to seize the day. Make the most of it.